There is a smell the earth gives off in late October that you will not find at any other time of year. It is not the smell of decay, though things are dying. It is not the smell of cold, though the frost is close. It is something older than both. It is the smell of the ground opening itself one last time before it closes for winter. My grandfather called it the earth's last breath. He said if you could not smell it, you had no business farming. I was 9 years old the first time he put my hand flat against the soil on a morning like that. The air was sharp, my fingers were stiff, but the ground beneath my palm was still warm, not hot, not summer warm, but alive, like the skin of an animal resting. He pressed my hand down harder and said, "Feel that, Eli. That is the soil asking for something. And if you do not give it what it asks for, come spring, it will give you nothing in return." That was 62 years ago. I have never forgotten it. And I have never once gone into winter without answering what the soil asks. Now, people have told me, visitors sometimes, or men from the county extension office who come around every few years with their clipboards and their soil test kits, they have told me that what we do is old-fashioned, that there are better ways, faster ways. They talk about chemical amendments and synthetic nitrogen and things I cannot even pronounce. They look at our fields and they see something behind the times. But I will tell you what I see when I look at their fields. I see land that is tired. I see topsoil that blows away in a dry wind. I see dirt, not soil. There is a difference, and it is not a small one. Dirt is what is left when the life has gone out of the ground. Soil is alive. It breathes. It feeds. It remembers. What I am going to share with you is what my people have put into the ground before winter for 300 years. Not because we read it in a book, not because someone with a degree told us to, because the men and women who came before us watched and listened and learned what the earth needed, and they passed it down, mouth to ear, father to son, mother to daughter, the way all true knowledge travels. But there is something else I want to tell you. Something my father told me when I was old enough to work our land alone. Something about why the timing matters more than the method. I will get to that. But first, you need to understand what goes into the ground and why. The first thing, and the most important, is manure. Not any manure, not fresh manure straight from the barn. That is a mistake I have seen young men make, and it is a costly one. Fresh manure is too hot. It burns. It carries the seeds of weeds you do not want. It has not yet broken down into something the soil can use. What you want is aged manure. We call it black gold in my community, though we do not use that phrase lightly, because we are not people who glorify wealth, but we glorify what feeds us, and aged manure feeds everything. My grandmother kept a compost pile behind the barn that was older than some of the trees on our property. She tended it the way she tended her children, with discipline and patience. She turned it every few weeks with a wooden-handled pitchfork that had belonged to her own mother. She added straw. She added kitchen scraps, the potato peels, the apple cores, the eggshells she crushed between her palms with a sound like gravel under boots. She added manure from the horses, from the cows, never from the pigs. She said pig manure carried something unclean in it, something the soil did not want. I do not know if science agrees with her. I know that her garden fed 14 people every year without fail. By late October, the pile from the previous year was ready. It had turned dark, almost black, and it smelled not like waste, but like the forest floor after rain. Rich, deep. When you picked up a handful, it crumbled soft between your fingers, and if you looked closely, you could see the tiny white threads of fungus running through it, the living web that holds the soil together. That is what goes into the ground before winter. You spread it across the beds, across the rows, across every piece of ground you intend to plant in spring. Not thin, not a dusting, a generous layer, as thick as your thumb is long. You are not decorating the earth. You are feeding it. The second thing we put into the ground is leaves. I know that sounds simple, but let me tell you something about simplicity. The world outside our community has spent the last 100 years making things complicated that were never meant to be complicated. They take a problem that has a plain answer, and they wrap it in machinery and chemistry until the answer is buried so deep nobody can find it anymore. Leaves are the plain answer to a question the soil asks every autumn. When the maples and the oaks and the hickories drop their leaves, they are not making a mess. They are making a gift. Every leaf that falls carries minerals pulled up from deep in the earth, from places the roots reached that no plough ever could. Calcium, potassium, magnesium, things the topsoil has lost over the growing season. The trees bring them back up and offer them to the surface. All you have to do is accept the offer. We gather leaves by the wagon load, not with machines, with rakes and hands and children who complain at first and then start throwing them at each other until someone's mother calls them back to work. We pile them on the garden beds and on the fallow fields. Some years, my father would run the team over them with a drag to break them down smaller. Other years, he would leave them whole and let the winter do the work. The frost would break them. The snow would press them. By spring, they were halfway to nothing, thin brown lace dissolving into the soil like sugar into water. Do you know what happens when you stop returning leaves to the earth? I have seen it. There are houses near our community, English houses they call them, where every autumn the people rake their leaves to the curb, and a truck comes and carries them away. Year after year, decade after decade. And then those same people go to the store and buy bags of fertilizer to put on their lawns and gardens because the soil has gone thin and pale and nothing grows right anymore. They are buying back what they threw away. My grandfather would have called that a kind of madness, though he was too polite to say it to anyone's face. The third thing we put into the ground before winter is wood ash. This is something my people have done since the first Amish families cleared land in Pennsylvania. Every home has a wood stove. Every wood stove makes ash, and that ash is not waste. It is concentrated life. Wood ash is rich in lime. It sweetens the soil, brings the balance back when the ground has turned sour from a long season of growing. My father tested the soil not with a kit, but with his tongue. I watched him do it. He would take a pinch of earth and touch it to the tip of his tongue and close his eyes, and he could tell you whether the soil was acid or sweet, the way a baker can tell you whether the bread needs salt. If it was sour, he would spread ash, not too much. A light coating, like the first snow of November, just enough to whiten the ground before the wind mixed it in. Too much ash will push the soil too far the other way, and then you have a different problem. Balance is everything. In the soil, in life, in the way a man carries himself. My mother saved ash in a tin bucket by the back door all winter long. By autumn, she had enough to cover every bed in her garden. She said the ash was the fire giving back to the earth what the trees had given to the fire. A circle, she called it. Everything a circle. I did not understand her then. I understand her now. The fourth thing, and this is something I have rarely heard spoken about outside my community, is bone, ground bone. We save the bones from every animal we butcher, beef bones, chicken bones, the heavy leg bones of hogs. We boil them for broth first, because nothing is wasted, and then we dry them in the sun or near the stove until they are brittle enough to crack. We crush them with a hammer on a flat stone until they are chips and powder, and we work them into the soil before the ground freezes. Bone gives the earth phosphorus. That is the word the extension men use. We just call it strength. Phosphorus is what makes roots grow deep. It is what gives a plant the will to push down into the dark before it ever reaches up toward the light. Without it, you get plants that are tall and pretty and fall over in the first wind. Show without substance. I have seen that in fields. I have seen that in people too. My grandfather said a man who does not put bone in the ground is raising crops on hope, and hope he said, is not a farming plan. Hope is what you have after you have done everything you know to do. It is the last thing, not the first. Now, I told you earlier that my father shared something with me about timing, about why, when you do this, matters as much as what you do. This is the part I have carried with me for most of my life, and it has shaped the way I farm, the way I think, and the way I understand the earth. My father said there is a window, a narrow window, after the last harvest, but before the first hard freeze. In our part of the country, that window is usually 3 to 4 weeks long, somewhere between the middle of October and the middle of November, though it shifts from year to year. You cannot mark it on a calendar. You have to watch for it. You have to feel for it. During that window, the soil is still alive enough to begin absorbing what you give it. The worms are still working. The microbes, the tiny living things in the ground that do the real work of turning death into life. They are still active. They take the manure, the leaves, the ash, the bone, and they begin breaking it down immediately. They pull it into the soil the way a body digests food. Slowly, deeply, thoroughly. If you wait too long, if the ground freezes before you have fed it, those materials just sit on top. The manure dries out and blows away. The leaves mat down into a wet, airless blanket that suffocates the ground instead of nourishing it. The ash washes off in the winter rains. The bone goes nowhere. You have wasted your effort and your resources, and in spring, you are starting from nothing. My father said that the window is the earth's invitation. It opens once a year. If you miss it, you cannot force it open again. He compared it to a conversation. The soil is willing to listen, he said, but only for a short time. After that, it goes quiet, it sleeps, and you cannot wake it by shouting. I have tested this, not because I doubted him, but because a man has to learn some things through his own hands. One year, I was maybe 30, 32, I got behind on the autumn work. The harvest had been large, and the butchering took longer than expected, and by the time I turned my attention to the soil, the ground was already starting to harden. I spread the manure and the leaves anyway, told myself it would be fine. Come spring, I could see the difference with my eyes. The beds where I had been on time back in October were dark and loose and full of worms, The beds where I had been late were pale, compacted, resistant. The crops I planted there that year were thin and slow and never did catch up to the others. One season of poor timing took the whole year's yield down. The soil forgave me eventually, but it took 2 full years of careful feeding to bring those beds back to where they had been. That is a lesson the modern world does not want to hear, that there are rhythms you cannot shortcut, that nature operates on a schedule you did not write and cannot rewrite. I see it everywhere now, the rush, the impatience, the belief that you can substitute speed for wisdom and get the same result. You cannot. Not in the soil, not in anything that matters. There is a 5th thing I want to mention, though it is not something you put into the ground so much as something you do to the ground. After all the materials have been spread, the manure, the leaves, the ash, the bone, you cover it. We use straw, old straw, from the previous year's bedding, or from the edges of the hayfields where the baler did not reach. You lay it down thick, 8 or 10 inches deep, and you leave it. The straw is a blanket. It holds the heat in. It keeps the rain from washing your amendments away. It gives the worms and microbes a dark, moist, warm space to keep working, even as the air above turns bitter. By spring, when you pull back what remains of the straw, the soil underneath is soft and dark and alive in a way that will make you stop and just look at it. I have seen it 100 times, and it still moves me. You can smell the life in it. You can feel the heat rising from it on a cold March morning. It is ready, not because of anything clever you did, because you listened to what the earth asked for, and you answered it honestly. I want to ask you something now, and I want you to sit with it honestly. When was the last time you gave something the time it actually needed? Not the time you wanted it to take. Not the time the instructions on the bag said it should take. The real time. The time the thing itself required. We live in a world that has forgotten how to wait. And I say that without anger. I say it with sadness. Because waiting is not laziness. Waiting is trust. When you put manure and leaves and ash and bone into the ground in late October, and then you walk away, when you let the snow fall and the frost do its work, and the months pass with nothing visible happening, you are trusting a process that is older than any human memory. You are saying, I have done my part. Now the earth will do its part. And it will. It always has. It always will. But only if you do your part first. And only if you do it at the right time. I have seen what happens to land that is not fed. Not just for one season, but for years. There is a farm near our community. It was a farm, I should say, because it is not one anymore. The man who owned it believed he could take from the ground every year and never give back. He planted the same crop year after year in the same rows. He never spread manure. He never turned leaves into the beds. He never rested the soil. For a time, the land produced. Not well, but enough. And then, one year, it stopped. Not gradually. It stopped. The seeds he planted came up thin and yellow and fell over before they were knee-high. The soil had gone to dust, pale, powdery, lifeless dust that blew across the road when the wind picked up. He sold the land to a man who builds houses now. The topsoil is under concrete. 3 generations of farming ended. That did not have to happen. It happened because a man believed he was smarter than the rhythm, because he thought giving back was optional. It is not optional. It is the price of admission. If you want to take from the earth, you must give to the earth. That is not philosophy. That is physics. That is biology. That is the plain truth my people have followed for 300 years, and it has never once failed us. I will leave you with this. My grandfather, on one of the last autumn days I spent with him before he passed, stood at the edge of our north field with his hands behind his back. The light was going gold, the way it does in late October. The manure had been spread. The leaves had been raked on. The ash was down. He looked at the field the way a man looks at a sleeping child, with something more than satisfaction, with reverence. And he said to me, in that quiet way of his, that made you lean in close to hear, the man who feeds his soil in autumn will never go hungry in spring. And the man who forgets the soil forgets himself. I think about that every year, when the air turns sharp and the trees begin to let go. I think about the smell of the ground opening one last time. I think about my grandmother's compost pile, my mother's tin bucket of ash, my father's tongue pressed to the earth. I think about the bones cracked on the flat stone and the straw laid down like a prayer over the waiting ground. And then I go out. And I do what they taught me, not because I was told to, because I watched what happened when it was done right, and I watched what happened when it was not. The soil does not lie. It does not flatter. It does not pretend. It gives back exactly what it receives. That is the oldest truth I know, and it has not changed in 300 years.